Everybody's got predictions. We have them too, but we've done the research and we've got a lot of reasons why these six things are definitely going to happen. All right, Chris, you're up first. Give us your expert prediction.
If I said a quarterback this year was going to throw for over 5,000 yards and over 45 touchdowns, people will be like, okay, is this an expert predictions video or a bold predictions video? And look, for most quarterbacks, that would be a bold prediction, but not when the quarterback is named Patrick Mahomes. This is a guy who's twice thrown for over 5,000 yards already. He's thrown for 50 touchdowns in a season. Now, granted, he's only gone over 45 touchdowns once, but I think he's going to do it for the second time this year. It's amazing that after the Chiefs traded Tyreek Hill before the 2023 season, just said like, hey, we're just going to play without one of the best, offensive weapons in the NFL. They go out and just win back-to-back Super Bowls with subpar, even, one year in 2023, you could argue one of the worst receiving groups in the entire NFL. Well, they said enough of that. This year, we're fixing that. Not only did they bring in Hollywood Brown, a speedster, a deep threat, they then went out and drafted the fastest wide receiver in this class in Xavier Worthy in the first round. Not only do they have one deep threat like they had with Tyreek Hill back in the day, they now have two. We are going to see Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball down the field over and over. I mean, it's going to be like ridiculous. You're going to be sitting there on the couch watching Red Zone. It's going to be like, we go back to Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes throwing like a 70-yard bomb to Hollywood or a 70-yard bomb to Worthy or whatever. And let's not forget, he still has Rashee Rice. He still has Travis Kelce. I really think we see Patrick Mahomes put up an MVP type of year this year, over 5,000 yards, over 45 touchdowns. And right now, I can't say he's a value in fantasy drafts because he's usually drafted as a QB4, but it feels like a value for Patrick Mahomes, a guy who actually this year I think will be the QB1 and has QB1 upside.
Yeah, Mahomes could definitely wind up being the QB1. How about tight end? Who could be this year's number one fantasy tight end? I don't think we're going to see a repeat. I actually don't think it's going to be Travis Kelce. Let's go to Buffalo. I think this is Dalton Kincaid's year. My prediction is that he is the fantasy tight end one, and he leads Buffalo in receiving. He's going to hit the 1,000-yard mark. Let's recall that Dalton Kincaid was drafted before Sam Laporta last year. He was a first-round pick. Buffalo did not take him just to be a complementary piece to that offense. He's going to be featured even more than he was as a rookie. Now, last year he had Stephon Diggs still as the target hog there. We know Diggs is gone, obviously, and his replacement is a rookie and not one of those top wide receivers who was picked early in the first round. It's Keon Coleman, who, yeah, he was picked early, but honestly, I was surprised he was picked that early, and he's not one of my favorite receiver prospects. Maybe he'll pan out, but he is not a one-to-one replacement for Stephon Diggs. I really believe Dalton Kincaid is the best receiver in this offense. We're looking beyond Keon Coleman at kind of a ragtag group of veterans and casts off from other teams. Curtis Samuel, Chase Claypool, MVS, and then Khalil Shakir. Look, honestly, kind of like a nice slot featured player, but not somebody who should be more than like a third target in any offense. Dalton Kincaid is going to be a much bigger part of this offense. And let's also look at the fact that he started out slow, but after week 6, in which he was inactive and really didn't do much the first 5 weeks, he was getting a lot bigger target share. He only wound up with 673 yards on the season, but if you look from that point on, and also have to remember, they replaced offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey mid-season, so this offense had a much different look. If you look from week 7 on, Kincaid was on a pace for 87 receptions and 858 yards, and with Diggs gone and Kincaid stepping up in year 2, I think 1,000 yards is easily within reach. And so partly because of that, I also kind of want to throw in, I guess, a little bonus prediction. I don't think any Bills wide receiver is even top 30 in fantasy. I just don't have a lot of faith in any one of these players. I think this offense is really going to be a lot of Dalton Kincaid, a lot of James Cook, and a lot of Josh Allen running around and slinging the ball deep. But Dalton Kincaid is a guy I really feel is going to be not just the tight end one in fantasy, but the best draft pick you can make at the position. All right, now it's time to move to everyone's favorite position, of course. That's running back.
Yeah, look, I think 2024, we're going to look back and say that was the year of the running back, honestly. I mean, last year, you look at it, okay, Christian McCaffrey, sure, he was great, but the only other running back to even average over 20 fantasy points per game was Kyren Williams, and he missed like 4 or 5 games down the stretch, so it didn't even feel like he really dominated all year. The RB2 last year was Breece Hall with 17.1. Travis Etienne was a top 3 running back, averaging a whopping 16 points per game. Like, it was a terrible year for running backs last year. I mean, really, like, you look at it, like, some of the best running backs were either not drafted or drafted late. Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Kyron Williams, these guys were either drafted very late or not drafted at all, and they were all like top 5 running backs last year. But I think we see that change this year. I think we see at least 3 to 4 running backs go over 20 points per game, which is what we usually see on most years. I think we see a couple guys in that 18 to 19 range, a few in that 17 range. I think this is going to be a year where running backs rebound and people who are like just giving up on running backs and abandoning running backs pay the price. And people who take the values in fantasy drafts reap the rewards. Because when you look at it right now, running backs are being, well, I want to say maybe a little undervalued right now. On ESPN and Yahoo leagues, there are only 17 running backs going inside the top 48 picks, inside the top 4 rounds. You look at Sleeper, that number drops down to 15 running backs. And then you look at Underdog, there are only 11 running backs going in the top 4 rounds. You're telling me that the RB11 is not worth more than the wide receiver 30 or whatever is happening over there on Underdog? Wide receiver ADP is getting almost out of control. Look, for years we were known as like running back haters, love wide receivers too much. Our drafts are too wide receiver heavy. Well, now that's how almost every draft looks. And I think the pendulum has shifted a little bit too far towards the wide receiver side. And I think this year running back is going to be a value. And look, when we do our mock drafts, when we do underdog drafts, I find myself oftentimes having 2 running backs in the first 3, 4 rounds because the value is just too good. So I think this is going to be a year where people look back and say, man, running backs were a great value. It's the year of the running back. And then when 2025 comes around and everybody goes running back crazy, yeah, then you'll want to draft wide receivers again.
All right, my next prediction, I guess, is a bit of a downer. We always want to look at the guys who are going to break out and be the top of their position. I'm going to look to the bottom. I have a feeling that the Denver Broncos are going to win the rights to the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. I think they're going to be the worst team in the NFL, and I've got reasons. So, first of all, we look at last year's version of Denver. Wasn't too good. It really feels like Russell Wilson got a lot of the blame. I think that he deserves some of it because obviously he's not the same Russ as we've seen before, but I really don't think he's the issue here. And I think we're going to see that this year. Look, Sean Payton, great coaching his time in New Orleans, but it just doesn't feel like he's got that magic working in Denver. He's got his guy now, Bo Nix. Look, Bo Nix kind of feels like playing C, D kind of thing here. Like they need a quarterback, but they didn't have the rights to pick early enough to get one of the top quarterbacks. So they kind of talked themselves into like, this is the perfect guy for our system. Bo Nix is not the next Drew Brees. He's just not. And the only similarity I can think that we might see between Bo Nix and Drew Brees is that he'll probably check it down to the running back a whole lot and dump it off because Bo Nix, well, he completed a lot of passes at Oregon. A lot of them were short passes. That's kind of his strength. And you know what? This is what Sean Payton does. Chris, you pointed this out a while ago. Sean Payton offenses almost always rank among the top in RB targets. And Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator, who also used to be with New Orleans, it's the same thing. It's a very slow-paced, conservative offense. It's going to be a lot of just running the ball with this committee of a mess of a backfield where we don't even know who's going to make the team or not. Nobody who's going to scare opposing defenses. A lot of guys just catching these checkdowns and these screen passes. And then the wide receiver room didn't get any better. It's Cortland Sutton, who's a fine receiver. And then it's a rookie, Troy Franklin, who I will just have to say is probably the only draft pick they made this year that I even like. Like, they did not improve themselves, really, through the NFL draft, unless you think Bo Nix is a franchise quarterback. I don't. I don't think this offense is going to be very prolific in any way. Also, remember that defense last year? Halfway through the season, they were on pace for a historically bad defense as far as breaking records for yardage allowed. Remember that Dolphins game when Devon Achane had his coming out party? He was scoring 4 touchdowns, and Raheem Mostert was scoring 4 touchdowns, and they gave up 60-something points. Denver's defense was so bad, we really thought Vance Joseph was getting fired mid-season. He did manage to pull together and save his job. I don't feel very confident this defense is going to be much better this year. Altogether, I think this is just a disaster waiting to happen. So I'm really trying to not invest any fantasy stock in the Broncos. On a happier note, some teams that were really bad last year might be getting a lot better this year.
Yeah, let's go from the bottom to the top, or maybe like from the bottom to the middle top 10-ish. But I really think the two worst offenses last year, that was the Carolina Panthers and the New York Jets, who both ranked last and second to last in yards and total touchdowns. I think they're both top 15 offenses in both those categories this year. And in the case of the Jets, I think they're top 10, and I think the Jets are a playoff team. Obviously, we know the Jets, it really just comes down to Aaron Rodgers staying healthy. But in fantasy, I think you're going to want a piece of this offense. You're going to want Garrett Wilson. You're definitely going to want Breece Hall. Maybe you're even going to want like Tyler Conklin late, Malachi Corley late. I think this Jets offense is going to surprise. They already have one of the best defenses in the NFL. It was just handicapped by an offense that could not hold the ball for very long or kept turning it over deep in their own territory. But this year, it's not going to be an issue as long as Aaron Rodgers stays healthy. So Jets go from second to last to top 10 and a playoff team this year. And Panthers, I've talked about them a bunch. I think they're going to be a top 15 offense this year, especially in the passing department. I think they'll be a top 15 passing offense. And a lot of people are just looking at the Panthers like, this is going to be another terrible offense. You know, Bryce Young's a bust. There's nobody here. But the Panthers are one of the most undervalued offenses in fantasy. I mean, their wide receiver one, Deontay Johnson, typically goes in like round 7 or later of fantasy drafts. I think he's going to be an absolute steal. I think whoever the lead back here is, whether it's Chuba Hubbard, whether it's Jonathan Brooks late in the season, I think they're going to be an absolute steal. Maybe even some of the other pass catchers, surprise us here. And I think Bryce Young is absolutely going to surprise people. I mean, let's not forget, Jared Goff, year one with Jeff Fisher, looked like a total bust. Look at Jared Goff now. He's a pretty good NFL QB. Trevor Lawrence with Urban Meyer, year one, looked like a total NFL bust. Now, I know Trevor Lawrence hasn't lived up to expectations yet, but he certainly looks like a, startable, above average NFL QB. And, I mean, the Jags must agree. They just paid him. Dave Canales saved Geno Smith. He saved Baker Mayfield. I think he can certainly save Bryce Young. So the Panthers and Jets, who were the two worst offenses last year, both jump into the top 15 this year. Jets in the top 10. And people who realize it and take the values get the rewards.
All right, now we got to get some rookie talk in here. I don't mean this to be a bold prediction. Some people might see it that way and completely disagree, and some people might be on board. I'm going to say right now, Lad McConkey is going to outscore Malik Neighbors this year in fantasy, and I don't think Malik Neighbors is a top 20 receiver. Now, let's start with the obvious. Malik Neighbors is a very talented player. I have nothing against him. I don't think that is, a case of me condemning him as far as his talent, his abilities, motivation, nothing like that. I think he's an elite wide receiver prospect who happened to fall in the worst possible situation. I was one before the draft saying he reminds me of Jamar Chase. I could see him being an elite receiver from day one. But he fell in the worst place possible because it's not just that the Giants are a bad team, a bad offense with a bad quarterback. It's also that this is the worst match for a player like Neighbors. Now, here's the thing with Malik Neighbors. A lot of his production did come from those deep passes. Just like Jaden Daniels, a lot of his production in college came from those deep shots, right? He had multiple targets, not just Neighbors, right? Brian Thomas, etc. Daniel Jones is not exactly known for throwing the deep ball. And we know this, but let me back it up with some data. And yes, Daniel Jones is going to be the starting quarterback if healthy. They've already said there is no competition here, right? Drew Lock is there. He's the backup, but it's Daniel Jones. He's getting his last crack to show that he should be in the NFL, really, and deserve anything of what he got from that contract. Okay, but let's look. Last year, Daniel Jones, only 6 games played before that neck injury, so don't want to take too much away from it, but we also do need to look at his most recent data and what he did with Brian Daboll here. So last year, in those 6 games played, averaged 5.7 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. That's not that great. In 2022, when he played more, not a full season, but he definitely played more, 6.8 yards per attempt, which ranked 25th among quarterbacks. All right, yards per completion, 27th. But it gets worse. ADOT, we know that stat, average depth of target. It doesn't mean everything, but it does mean something when we're talking about a guy who's a speedy receiver and a deep threat who relies on those deep shots. In 2022, Daniel Jones is 6.4 ADOT. That ranks 48th out of 48 possible quarterbacks. That's right. There were 48 quarterbacks who could have qualified for this stat, and he was dead last somehow. A 4.9% deep throw percentage, which also ranked, wait for it, 48th out of 48 quarterbacks. And last year in those 6 games, well, it wasn't any better. His ADOT was 48th out of 53 quarterbacks, and his deep throw percentage was 49th. Daniel Jones does not throw the ball deep because he's not very good at it. All right. He is the definition of a game manager and a guy who will just tuck the ball and scramble the first chance he gets to avoid a sack. This offensive line is not much better. The running game is definitely not better with Saquon Barkley gone, and it's not like there's a bunch of other weapons to throw to. Long story short, Daniel Jones, Malik Neighbors is a match made in hell for fantasy production. Lad McConkey gets Justin Herbert, who is obviously much better at throwing the deep ball and also very good at completing passes in terms of accuracy. Herbert had one of the highest catchable target rates out of all quarterbacks last year. Lad McConkey is going to be the number one receiver there because they lost receivers. McConkey was drafted to replace Keenan Allen. You can see how that's going to turn out for him much better. So I'm avoiding Neighbors. Sorry, he's going too early for me. I'm going to take McConkey every chance I get because I feel pretty strongly about this one. Take heed to some of those predictions. So those could be some winning strategies for you on draft day. Speaking of, if you have a late pick in your fantasy draft, you definitely don't want to miss these draft strategies.